All right, so the election of 1964 is an important one. Again, this is really about a year after JFK's assassination, and Lyndon Baines Johnson is seeking election. All right. Now, he receives two main challenges, I guess we could say, from different. So within his own party, the Democrat Party, there, of course, is a major wing within there that is white supremacist, pro segregation. And that is the majority of white voters in the South are segregationist, white supremacist, sympathetic at least, Democrats, it seems. Okay, well, a man rises up to represent their interest, the racist and the white supremacist interest, and that is his name is George Wallace. He was the governor of Alabama. Now, initially, he had been sort of something like more of a kind of a progressive in at least rhetoric in terms of his support for the working class white man and so on and so forth. And he had kind of left race alone in the 50s. But he had lost an early election to a more virulent racist and decided that he would not shy away from embracing the white supremacist, at least the segregationist platform fully. And he makes this famous promise that Alabama will remain segregated always. And he, with his own, he stands in front of the doors at the University of Alabama and blocks these two young black men in 1963 trying to integrate that university. And he's big guy. He was a boxer. So it's all very theatrical, whatever. Well, he decides in 1964, he's the governor of Alabama, that he's going to run for the Democratic nomination and challenge Lyndon Baines Johnson. Okay. And it's, so the Democrat Party is in danger of being split in two over the civil rights issue, all right? So there's George Wallace on one hand. The Republicans, on the other hand, nominate a guy named Barry Goldwater. Now, Barry Goldwater, in terms of his personal, he's from Arizona, he's a Republican. In terms of his personal beliefs or whatever, he's not a racist, a white supremacist. Okay, kind of personally tolerant, I believe, is actually a member of the NAACP. All right, so there's that. But he does not support the civil rights movement because he does not support the involvement of the federal government into social problems or into society. So he does not think he wants to at all times limit the federal government. And some people claim that this is kind of the foundation of conservatism. I would not call it conservatism. I would call it libertarianism. Why? It's all about the individual's freedom. It's all about the limitation of the federal government. That's the central element of the ideology. A conservative is someone who wants to defend traditional moral things, the traditional morality of a place, the traditional morality of the West, the Judeo-Christian traditional morality. And part of that is defending human dignity. Now, a conservative will want will want to avoid the federal government's involvement if possible. A conservative will want sort of social problems to be resolved at the most immediate level. So say within a family, that family deals with its own issues most competently. It doesn't need the federal government to come in and solve things for it, okay, in most cases. And so ideally, right, you would have local communities making decisions, solving problems, churches, neighborhoods, families. Everything's very local for a conservative. However, if it is necessary for the federal government to step in to protect, say, someone from being murdered, then yes, you would support it. So the morality, the protection of human dignity, that is more important than, say, some ideology of limiting federal government. So I would not equate libertarianism with conservatism at all. I would distinguish the two things from each other. And I would say Barry Goldwater is a libertarian, all right? And so he's not someone, say, look, this is why the black people, the civil rights movement does not get behind the Republican Party. Because the Republican Party under Barry Goldwater is embracing libertarianism and is saying, look, we don't support the civil rights movement, not because we are white supremacists, but because we don't want the federal government to get involved. And so, of course, that's going to start attracting white supremacists because that's exactly what they want. They don't necessarily want someone up there using racist language. Maybe they do, some of them, because they're crazy, but some of them just want the policy. of being left alone or whatever. Okay, so you've got Goldwater for the Republicans. Within the Democrat Party, you've got Wallace versus Lyndon Johnson. All right. Well, the Democrat Party is in danger of splitting up. Okay, and because there is this candidate Goldwater, who is who is opposing in federal intervention through the civil rights movement, then Wallace steps down. Okay, and so the election of '64 is going to be Lyndon Johnson versus Goldwater. Now, the Democrat convention of 1964 is a very difficult one. As I mentioned in the last lecture, for Mississippi, you have two different delegations. The one supporting civil rights, which includes black people, or is comprised entirely of black people, 34 delegates there, and then the white supremacist delegation. And the civil rights delegation is expecting Lyndon Johnson to support them. Okay? But Lyndon Johnson does not openly support them. Lyndon Johnson is trying to be all things to all people. He's trying to appear like a progressive to one wing of the party and appear like more of a conservative to the other wing of the party. And it just doesn't work, right? So what he does is he's trying to sort of like limit the involvement of the civil rights delegation in the convention. So he says, look, if you're going to come, first of all, just don't come. He tries to convince them not to come and to wait until 1968 when they will put some sort of like rules in place against racial discrimination within the Democrat Party or whatever, but wait till 68. And they're saying, no, we're not going to wait. Forget it. We've been through all this before. We're not waiting. Okay. So then, so he says, okay, look, you can send two delegates to be seated, like recognized, but they won't be seated with the Mississippi delegation. They won't be recognized as the official Mississippi delegation. Also, you can't have two black people. You have to have one black person and one white person. You have to have one white person in this delegation that you're sending. Okay. And so this is and you can't claim to represent Mississippi. Okay. So this is really irksome, obviously, for those delegates. They feel a sense of betrayal. And there are these very strong activists within the delegation, strong speakers, who are gaining national attention, who are drawing attention to the horrors of life in the South for black people. This lady, Fannie Lou Hamer, is one of them. Well, Lyndon Johnson says she's not allowed to talk at all. She can't say anything, right? All right. So and they're also trying to limit the involvement of this lady, Rita Schwerner, who's the wife of one of the murdered civil rights workers who had been killed in June of that year, a few months earlier. Okay. So Johnson is trying to control and contain this civil rights delegate, this pro-civil rights delegation from Mississippi. All right. But that doesn't satisfy the white supremacists, right? They are not going to get over the fact that Johnson supported the civil rights bill. So he's already lost them. So it didn't really make any sense for him to try to pacify them or whatever. He already lost the white supremacists. He should have really just embraced the civil rights delegation. Because what happens then, he alienates both groups, right? So obviously from a moral perspective, he should have endorsed the civil rights delegation. But even just from a pragmatic, political, ambitious perspective, it didn't work out for him. So, of course, he wins the nomination. Wallace had stepped down, all right? But the white supremacists vote for Barry Goldwater. Not because Barry Goldwater is overtly a white supremacist, but because he supports non-intervention of the federal government and doesn't therefore support the civil rights movement. And then the civil rights activists feel betrayed by Johnson. And they feel betrayed by the white liberal progressives in general. And so you hear about critique of white liberals, maybe within the black community. Well, that goes back to this moment of, starting with Kennedy trying to control what was happening in the March on Washington, but then with LBJ sort of trying to control what's happening here with the Democrat convention in '64. The idea is these white progressive liberals in the Democrat Party are not actually committed to civil rights. They're sort of moderately committed to it, but not fully committed to it, okay? And other things get in the way. As this lady, Fannie Lou Hamer, said to Johnson's vice presidential candidate, she told him she thought he was a good man. She'd been praying for him. But and she knew he was a good man because he knew what the right thing to do was, but that he was afraid to do it. And he wouldn't do it, therefore. So there's that sense of betrayal that doesn't go away within the civil rights movement. And when we're talking here about the mainstream civil rights movement, the Martin Luther King Jr. wing of it, a lot of these activists feel really betrayed. And some of them are going to go towards the radicalism and the black nationalism and the separation movement, but others are just going to, they're going to remain committed. Most of them are going to remain committed to the principles of King and human dignity, equality, and integration, but be really just disillusioned with the participation and support they have received from white liberal progressives.